Okay, so this Photoshop demo, I wanted to focus on two things tonight. Um, Things that maybe you guys already know or don't know, but it's always helpful to refresh. I wanted to go over how to create Photoshop brushes. So finding a texture online and making a Photoshop brush out of it is always really helpful if you're trying to create like a stylized rendering, or it's also really helpful when you're working on, for example, like a site section if you want to add some texture to the ground you're cutting through. Um, Photoshop brushes are a great way to do that. And then the second thing I wanted to go over tonight are smart objects. Um, they're a really great way to work in Photoshop without uh, being destructive with your different layers. So I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. But first, let's get started with Photoshop brushes. So, as you guys know, a brush is, for example, if we take our paintbrush, a brush is basically anything that you can paint with or erase with or use the clone stamp tool. So right now, this is our normal brush, and a couple things we can do to make it bigger or smaller. You can press Alt and hit your right and right click, and if you drag to the right or left, that makes it larger or smaller. And then if you drag up and down, that actually changes the hardness. So hardness is how hard the edge of that brush is. So if I hold Alt and right click and drag up, that will reduce the hardness. So there's about 70%. I can continue. So the edges get fuzzier and fuzzier with the hardness, and okay. So how do we create a Photoshop brush? Under here we have a bunch of preset ones, or ones that you guys might already have downloaded, but how do you create a brand new brush? Some of them I have here are these crazy textures. This is just a watercolor texture that I created. So I'm basically going to show you guys how to create Photoshop brushes on your own. So one Photoshop brush, looking at this rendering, that might be useful is maybe a cloud brush. So how can I paint in clouds in Photoshop? So the first thing I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to go to the internet and download a brush or a photo of a cloud that I would like to use. I'm going to bring this over here. So I'm just going to Google cloud PNG. And I'll go to images, and I want to pick something that doesn't really get too close to the edge here. You see this image has a really harsh edge at the bottom. Those are images I might try to avoid, only because when you create these look like bubbles. Yeah, they're bubbles. Having that harsh edge on the image will make the brush not as versatile. You can't just like stamp it in the middle. Your brush will also have those harsh edges. So I already saved a couple, but I think I saved this brush texture and this one, which will should be enough for this demo. Okay, so I'm just gonna go ahead and open those images. And let's actually start with this one. So one thing to know about creating brushes is that when you create them, you actually want your image file size to be as large as possible. And we can check that by going over to image adjustments. Sorry, no, image size. And we're